I've got the pleasure this evening of introducing Professor Richard Murphy, who's come to speak to us about economics and taxation, which he's a specialist in. As you will have seen from the bio, or many of you will have seen, that Richard trained as an accountant as a young man, practiced as an accountant in private practice, I think best part of 40 years. Is that right, Richard? Something like that, anyway.
Mainstream occupation for 20 years.
20 years, yeah. And since then, he's become something of a campaigner. He's very well known as a co-founder of the Tax Justice Network, which has campaigned for a number of years on tax avoidance and tax havens and so on. Very active blogger and communicator with hundreds of thousands of people who watch him on a regular basis, weekly basis. Also an academic as well. You'll see he's an emeritus professor at Sheffield University in accounting. So you can see that he brings with him both practical experience of accounting in the private sector, academic research and so on, and also the campaigning arm that he's been latterly so involved with. Those of you that have had the pleasure of seeing any of his blogs will know that immediately that Richard is a very trenchant critic of neoliberalism. And it's his solutions to neoliberalism that are, of course, particularly interesting. And that's where we get the title of tonight's lecture from, Needing a Better Song to Sing. And hopefully what he'll impart with us tonight is a better song than the current economic narrative that we've all been struggling through for the last few decades. So with that introduction, please give a welcome to Professor Richard Murphy. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. It's great to be here. I've never been to Keele before. I have been to Stoke-on-Trent before, but I've never been to Keele, so it's nice to be here. I'll tell you a little story about my university, Sheffield. Everything at Sheffield is the University of Sheffield, except the business school, which is Sheffield University Management School, because that spells sums. And we can do them, is what we say. Enough of that. I have a theme. It is indeed, we need to find a better song to sing. Does anybody know where my title comes from? Audience participation from the start. No? Anybody seen Educating Rita? Yes, great film. Rita's in the pub with her family, and they're singing Roll Out the Barrel, and she walks out and says, there must be a better song to sing. And so she goes to a university. What a mistake. And she finds a professor there, otherwise known as Michael Caine. And the interesting thing is that Michael Caine thinks that she might have the better song. Not him, her. And that's the whole basis of the film. Where is the better song? And I'm going to use that as my theme tonight. You're not going to have to sing. There is no audience participation in singing. I'm sorry, that's not true. But the better song to sing may well be not that far away. And that's the point I want to make. We do live in a country with a political system that I, let's be honest, loathe. I'm not going to beat around the bush about that. I hate where we are. We are not delivering for people in this country. But it's not something new, weird and strange overall that I'm looking for. We have the knowledge to deliver a better world. And that's the point about the better song to sing. We've just got to find it. Start humming it. Put the words to it. That's what we're going to do. And I want a new economic paradigm. And the new economic paradigm that I want is called the politics of care. Because I do care. And I don't think our economics does. In fact, I think it's designed not to care. And as far as I'm concerned, a politics of care is one where we use all the available resources within our economy, recognizing planetary constraints, to meet the needs of everyone, if necessary, constraining the consumption of wants and the accumulation of wealth to achieve that goal. So those who don't like that can leave now. Because some people won't. I know I will upset someone tonight, but yes, I do mean it. We might have to stop meeting some wants if we're going to live within planetary constraints, and we might have to constrain some wealth. Elon Musk, you're in my sightlines. And in this season of Advent, because that is what we are now in, no, I'm not going to give you a sermon, but I'm going to mention it, it's worth mentioning that most of what I'm talking about isn't that radical or new. In fact, there was this chap who was around a couple of thousand years ago, and if you bother to read Luke's Gospel, and as a Quaker I do read the Bible, I am a Quaker, and what he had to say is remarkably similar to what I might have to say. That said, I will make some of you uncomfortable this evening, and some of you will actually think it's just downright confusing. I'm going to be talking about a subject close to most people's hearts, which very, very few people understand. It's called money. And there was a great professor of economics in the last century, J.K. Galbraith. I know his son Jamie, I didn't know Ken Galbraith. And he said, the process of creating money is so repulsively simple that people will not accept the truth. And you will probably have that problem. But I'm arguing with you now that tonight, I'll be talking to you about a system that we need and that is possible, and that every young person on the planet will want us to deliver for them. And that's my biggest motivation of all. There will be other parents here, I am quite sure. It would be very odd if there weren't. And I've got two sons, both of whom now work for me, rather strangely. My videos have to be made, and I'm not an editor. So one son is the editor, and the other one now is beginning to manage our events and everything else. But I work for them, fundamentally, and I work for every young person, because this can't carry on, is the point of what I'm saying. We've reached the end of the line. We have to do something different. And at the core of that is my message that we have to love our neighbours as ourselves. That is what the politics of care is about. But let's start by talking about the current tune. I call the current tune neoliberalism. And most people have a problem with that term, so I'd like another one instead, which is anti-socialism. Not socialism, anti-socialism. You know what anti-social is. That's what this is. Margaret Thatcher named it. She said there's no such thing as society. And she meant it, for all the denials that have been said ever since. This is anti-social. It's economics that we were brought up with, but we probably didn't choose. I can see there's many people of around my age here tonight. I feel at home. Don't often speak to audiences where the majority are grey-haired. It's nice. It's good. But even we didn't choose this political system. I voted for the first time in the 1979 general election, which did bring us Margaret Thatcher. But did we really understand what she was going to do? Did we know that she was going to destroy British business? Did we know that she was going to sell up all our social housing so our kids can't have a social house today if they can't afford a house of their own? Did we know that she was going to create economic insecurity on the level that she did? Did we know that she was going to make over 3 million unemployed within 3 years of coming into office, totally unnecessarily? Did we know that she was going to blow North Sea oil? No, we didn't. We didn't choose that. Neoliberalism did. It is a totally antisocial politics which has left people alienated. That is the point. And all of economics and politics, as far as I'm concerned, are much the same thing. In fact, I was a professor of political economy. You can join the two together. I'm the only accountant that I know of who has been both a chair of economics and a chair of accounting, because the two speak the same language, supposedly, but actually never understand each other. It's like us in America, really. But most economists like to pretend that they're doing a science. Any economists present in the room? Oh, dear. I've now found out who I'm going to upset. Most of them do crap maths, based upon crap assumptions that produce crap outcome. The maths is not clever, nor is it very advanced, and the assumptions that underpin it are absolute nonsense. You are perfectly rational people. You've never changed your mind. Companies all maximize profit. I have prepared the accounts of thousands of companies, and not one of them has ever maximized profit, because not one of them would ever need to do so. But that's not a problem if you're an economist. Just assume they do, and the problem is solved and the maths will work. But economics is not like physics. Physics is a science. And I've studied quite a bit of physics as well of late. I'm writing about quantum economics of late, so I have to actually know something about quantum theory to do that. That's a science, but economics, no. Economics is just a story. And when it comes down to it, what matters is the way you tell them, as somebody once said, if I remember rightly. So we need to change the story. The story we've got about a world which doesn't care, a world which maximizes profit, a world which is indifferent to climate change, a world that doesn't give a damn about how the growth that it focuses upon is distributed between people, that is a story. And it's a story that is failing us terribly. It's not true, as neoliberal economics says, that government is the problem. The problem in this country right now is, we don't have enough government. How do I know? How many people are on an NHS waiting list at present? Come on, somebody here is. It is impossible that somebody here is not on an NHS waiting list. How many people can't get the service they need from the judiciary, in a court, whatever else it might be? Nothing works because we haven't got enough government. But we are told that doesn't matter because markets always know best. Have you noticed this nirvana of growth and this joy that's spreading across the land because we're all so wealthy now? Nobody's upset. Everybody's got enough to live on. Nobody's complaining that the books don't balance. No. You haven't seen that? No. But markets know best. Didn't you know that? And we're told that taxes harm well-being. I wrote a book called The Joy of Tax. My students didn't understand it. I had to explain to them that tax is the most interesting three-letter word ending in X in the English language. None of them were old enough to know what title I nicked. David Cameron told a joke about it at the 2015 Conservative Party conference. He said he took it home and tried it out with Samantha, and none of the positions worked. He got Tacky Joke of the Year award from the Independent newspaper for that. I quite enjoyed being the butt of the Tacky Joke of the Year award from the Prime Minister of the time. But taxes are actually the most powerful instrument we have to shape the world that we live in if you're a government. I believe in taxes. And we're told that public services must be minimized, but the result is that people are suffering, dying in hot corridors, and Wes Streeting is saying that kids with autism and ADHD aren't going to get the services they need so they can integrate into society. And then he wonders why 9% of young people aren't at work after they've left education. Join up the dots, Wes. There will be a video about that in the morning. There's a video from me every morning on YouTube. It's ever so novel, my YouTube channel. I'm going to give it a shameless plug. Richard J. Murphy. Took a long time to work out that one. In this world, wealth proves worth. My contention to you is, it doesn't. And you know that. You've met some pretty repulsive wealthy people. You know that they weren't worthy. And welfare is failure in this world of economics we need to replace. I'm not going to ask how many here are on an old age pension. That is welfare. That's what Nigel Farage wants to take away from you. Because 175 billion of the 300 plus billion pound welfare budget, which he says is terrible, is made up of old age pensions. You are a burden on society. Every one of you who's claimed it. Don't. Give it back now. Make Nigel happy day. And according to this theory, growth solves everything. And if you know anything about maths at all, it is impossible to grow infinitely on a finite planet. It just doesn't work. As Flanders and Swan once said, you can try it if you like, but you're better not to. We don't need austerity, is my message to you tonight. It's deliberate, it's designed, it's imposed. The harm that it's caused for 15 years, the deliberate destruction of our well-being, which has led to, no doubt, Reform being the most popular political party around here right now, is because George Osborne decided to destroy the well-being of people by denying them the funding they need. He's at fault here. Financialisation in the City of London is not, as Rachel Reeves called it, I'll pass the blame around all over the place. Don't worry, we're not going to be particular about who gets the blame here. Financialisation is the jewel in the crown, according to Rachel Reeves right now. My message to you is, try eating money. Aristotle knew, a long time ago, that money is not the basis of prosperity. You can't make money out of money, but apparently that's what Rachel Reeves still thinks. And climate denial is still going on. We pretend that we have a free gift of nature, one of the fundamental assumptions of neoclassical economics. It's there to be exploited. And yet, obviously, now I know they've changed the assumption every now and again. I know the details. But the point I'm making is that still is what is taught now. That you can assume you don't have to pay for the externalities and the costs are there. So democracy in this world of neoliberalism is for wimps. And the role of government is to manage decline. And that's what we've had for a long time. We have to let the market take over. So decline is the route we're going. The consequences are clear to see. Anxiety is everywhere. It's a design feature of neoliberalism. It is not an accident. They want you to be anxious. They want people to be anxious because then they'll be compliant, just as much as they want students to be in debt, because then they will have a burden of debt hanging around their neck just as much as a mortgage hung around our necks at one time, but at least we could see an end of it and we'd have an asset. Mortgage stands for the grip of death, by the way. That's what the word comes from, and student debt now plays the same role. And then they wonder why young people aren't saving for pensions, when they've got to pay 3 times the price in real terms that we had to for a house, and their student debt as well. And then they can't work out why there isn't any money left over. Inequality is deliberate inside this system. It's designed in. It is not a chance that Elon Musk is being paid $1 trillion for his work over the next few years. They want that. They think it's great. We should all aspire to it. It's the American dream. It's meant to be our dream. But of course it can't be. And environmental destruction is real. So the future feels smaller than the past. And that's, again, why we have people who are so fed up, they'll imagine voting for people who are so destructive. So, where are we? We were told there was no alternative. Tina, as Margaret Thatcher called it, only there is. That's what I'm going to talk to you about now. My argument is this, that this need not be the world we live in. We can have a better song to sing. There is a better song to sing. We are a wealthy society. There is £15 trillion worth of financial assets in the UK. That's a heck of a lot of money. That's 15 with 12 noughts after it. It will last from here to forever if you'd laid it out in a row. You could probably get beyond the solar system if you actually laid it out in pound notes. Anybody remember a pound note? They were great, weren't they? We actually have got improving technology. We don't need to suffer scarcity because if we used it intelligently, we could in fact produce more with less. And people crave belonging, dignity, and purpose, but we're denying it to them. Ecological limits need to be limited, and my point is that it is this interdependence between wealth, need, technology, scarcity, belonging, dignity, purpose, and ecological limits that we have to reconcile in the better song we're going to sing. That is what we need to build. So, what could we do? We could have an economy that exists to support life, and not the other way round. Well-being, and not wealth, could be our measure. So for the accountants in the room, you've got to put another indicator at the bottom of the P&L account. It's not how much have we made, but how much have we made better people off by. It's a different measure, well-being. Public services are not a curse, Public services are an investment in the future. If you're an educator, you know that. That's your whole purpose. Your job is about creating people for the future. But that shouldn't end. I graduated in 1979. I would never have known when I graduated that my job now would be a YouTube creator. Because quite frankly, that was beyond imagination, of course. But that's what I am. Every morning, we put out a YouTube. That's my main job. And I make money from it. Quite enough to pay my 2 sons fair salaries and leave a bit over to boost my pension. So we have to educate for life, because the world isn't going to be what it was when we were kids or when our kids are kids. And we have to do care as something that is productive economically and socially. That's the real wealth of nations. But to do this, we have to make some fundamental changes, because the world as it is not going to be told to change without a little pressure being brought to bear upon it. But I'm not a revolutionary. Far from it. I'm a Quaker. I don't like people getting hurt. I'm a bit of a pacifist, to be totally honest. So don't expect me to be calling you with hammer and sickles to the barricades, because I won't. But we have got to change our politics. We have to make every vote count so that every person believes that they are part of our democracy. So we need proportional representation. We have to bring an end to political donations of the sort we just heard Reform is getting, 9 million quid from one person who doesn't even live in the UK but does have a company in Thailand and is rooting it there. That has to end. We cannot sell politics to the highest bidder and therefore have them run our country rather than us or our representatives running the country on our behalf. The Lords have to go. Appointing people for life, it's absolutely archaic. It has to end. We have to have a proper democracy. And for that reason, I'm afraid to say, Charlie Boy's got to lose his job. I don't mind him being king, so long as he doesn't do what his brother gets up to. That's fine. He can be king, and they can keep all the ceremonials and trot around with their horses. That's okay. But he shouldn't be signing our Acts of Parliament. He should not be saying he's got a government. And the reason why is very simple. That's eugenic. The whole assumption is that that family is better than us. That inequality is built into the system. We are not as good as them. We cannot govern, they can. And I don't believe in that world. If we are to have a world where people believe they've got hope, they can't be told there's nothing, or there are things which are excluded from you. And we have got that. So it's got to go. And we have to reject the myth that markets must rule us. And so we have to change finance. And I'm going to get onto that in just a minute. Because we're not consumers, first of all. We're citizens and people, first of all. We're consumers very much second. And democracy is actually an act of co-creation and not passive consent. So we have to reconsider how we relate to the city. If we did, and I'm going to tell you how the money works in a second, I will tell you what I want as an outcome, because I think that's important. I want warm, secure homes for all. Not just now, but ones that people can live in so that their children can go to the same school throughout their primary school lives and then through their secondary school lives, so they have friends who they can grow up with, because that is the basis of secure young people with strong mental health. I want decent incomes and rewarding work. There was a great late sociologist called David Graeber. Did anybody hear the first Reith lecture? Did you hear the reference to BS jobs and wonder what it meant? Bullshit jobs. That's what David Graeber came up with. He referred to the Bermuda Triangle of bullshit jobs, which are lawyers, accountants, consultants. So, 2 of us are out. We've gone. And the best talent goes into those jobs, and it does not, in many cases, add value. So we have to have jobs that actually create value. We need to have a health and care system, and care, I make the point very strongly, that is based on dignity, an education that lets people flourish, and a green transition. I wrote the Green New Deal in 2008, and 6 weeks after we published it, there was this chap in the States who started talking about it. His name was Barack Obama. It was kind of rapid growth from an idea published in London to being on the trail in the US very quickly. And to pay for all of this, we'll create the money. It's easy. Most people say, where does the money come from? And the answer is, the government creates it. And people think I'm mad. I'm going to print money. We're going to go to Venezuela or Zimbabwe or Weimar, Germany. But I'll tell you how we make money. And we have done in this country every day since 1866. That's how much of a revolutionary I am. I'm basing my thinking on an Act of Parliament in 1866. And every day, the Bank of England has a bank account for the government, and it's always at zero at the start of the day. Nothing in it. And every day, they spend several billion quid. Just imagine, spending several billion quid a day. There's nothing in the bank. They just extend the government an overdraft. Not hard, because the government owns the Bank of England. Imagine how easy life would be if you owned your own bank. Does sort of change the perspective. They're the only people who own their own bank. But literally every day, the government prints money. It's not something radical or new or unusual. This has been happening since 1866. There's a chap who checks that the payment is legal in accordance with the budget that's been passed by Parliament, and once it is, the payment is made, whether or not there's money in the bank or not. At the end of the day, they bring in the tax that's been paid during the day, and they balance the books by issuing either treasury bills or government bonds. And government bonds, by the way, and this came up over dinner before we got here, government bonds are the same as the bond you can buy from your local building society. There's nothing mysterious about them. You just give somebody some money for 5 years, and they offer to pay you 4% on it during that period, and at the end of it, they'll give you your money back. That's what a government bond is. Absolutely, it's just a bank deposit account. Nothing mysterious, odd, or unusual about it. But the money is created by the bank. You try making your own money. There's this claim that there's something called taxpayers' money. Go on, try and make it. See where you end up. Anybody remember Dennis Healy? He had a word or a phrase for that. You'll end up on the wrong side of a prison wall. Because you can't make money. You're not allowed to make money. Only the government can create money. So the idea that what I've just said is unusual or radical is completely wrong. But nobody's heard the story. I'm telling you a new story of what actually happens, and not the fiction, which we're told now that there's something called taxpayers' money. Where did taxpayers' money come from? Well, I'll tell you where taxpayers' money come from. I don't know whether I've got any money on me. Look at that. I'm so cash-free. I haven't even got a note on me. Not one. God, how modern am I? I never thought I'd get to that stage in life. But the point is, even if the government prints it, and of course they don't, as I've just proved, I don't need it, the government spends it into existence. And then it taxes. So why does it tax? Because it doesn't need that to pay for it, because it's already paid for. The government's already paid for it with the buy of the Bank of England. It takes the money back in tax so that we don't get inflation. You do not pay tax to buy anything the government gives you. Not one penny of it. You pay tax to control inflation. That's it. And why does the government apparently borrow from the City of London when it can't borrow from the City of London? Because the City of London would have had no money if the government hadn't created it in the first place, after all. Because all money is ultimately created by the government. So what happens when they lend money to the government, as they claim? No, they're placing the money that was spent by the government and not taxed back on deposit with the government, because it's the safest place to put your money. And you know that, really. Because I bet quite a lot of you have just noticed that the limit that is guaranteed by the government on deposit accounts has gone up from 85,000 quid to 120,000 quid. I see some nodding heads, so some people have. You know that the only safe place to have money is in an account that the government has guaranteed. And why? Because they're the only people who can make the stuff. And therefore, they can always repay and nobody else can. And that's why everybody else banks with the government, and it's called government borrowing, but actually it's deposit making. If Barclays Bank had more and more deposits, it would be fine. How much longer have I got to go? 10 minutes. But when the government increases the deposit banking facility it provides, everyone says, oh, our grandchildren will have to repay this. The lucky grandchildren will inherit it. Why? Because the money that's on deposit is backed up. I'm going to do some double entry here now. There's one accountant at least I know in the audience. So the money with the government has a double entry, and that's private wealth. Private wealth is deposited with the government as borrowing. The lucky ones know. And do you know how I know this? I'm going to go back even further in history. Jane Austen taught me this lesson. How did Mrs. Bennet appraise Darcy's worth as a potential son-in-law? He got 10,000 a year in the 4%. What was the 4%? Government debt. How much was he worth? 250 grand. This man was wealthy beyond imagination. Government debt is private wealth. So the lucky grandchildren inherit the debt. They don't repay it. They never will. The debt's never been repaid since 1694. We'll keep on going back forever if we go at this rate. But the point is this. We can change the rules. We can print all the money we need, so long as there are resources to buy. We change everything about politics as a result. We don't try to balance the books. We don't pretend that the only goal we have is financial, because that's a really crap way to run a company, I can tell you, because I've seen it as a chartered accountant. I've never run a company on that basis. What you need to do is think about, how do we meet need? If you're a company, you're trying to find the product that the customer wants to buy. If you're a government, you're trying to find the products that your people in your country want from you. You actually look at, what do we need to do for people? And if you can't do it, and there are unused resources in your economy, you can put them to use, and you won't create inflation, because you're simply bringing into use redundant resources. And if you do, first of all, they won't be claiming benefits anymore. They will be paying tax, so you're better off as a government. And what is more, if you pay somebody like a doctor, not only, and there's lots of unemployed doctors in the UK right now, quite staggering number of unemployed doctors driving Ubers at this moment, because that's what Wes Streeting has decided to do, because apparently we can't afford them. But if you put them back into work on 80 grand a year, not only will you collect about 30% of that or more back as tax, but they'll probably put 3 other people back to work each year, at least. And they'll all be paying tax as well. In fact, the government will make 3 or 4 times back in tax what it spent to put the doctors to work. But we can't afford to do that, apparently. This is how corrupt our present system is. What I'm talking to you about is we need to manage our real resources. We need to run this world so that people get what they need. And we could do it if we stop obsessing about money, because the government is not like a household. One of the big problems is they keep on saying, Rachel Reeves says it, I learned budgeting at my mother's breakfast table. She balanced the bank account. Yeah, but she didn't own the bank, did she? But Rachel Reeves does now own a bank. And that's the big difference. Her mother couldn't make the money to make things possible. She had to earn it. The government can make the money so that we can make things possible, and as a result, earn for the country as a whole what we want done. But we have to understand that money works the other way around for the government from what it does for a household. So what is commonly called the household analogy, that we must balance the books as if we're a household, is utterly misleading. Money is not the same for a government as it is for you. We could also transform our savings, because I want to invest a lot to make this work. Up the road from where I live, there's a hospital which has been, for the last 10 years, held up by scaffold poles. Queen Elizabeth Hospital, King's Lynn. There's another one, not far in another direction, the West Suffolk Hospital in Bury St Edmunds, also held up by scaffold poles. The biggest reason why operations don't happen in the King's Lynn Hospital is shit coming through the ceiling into the operating theatre. Unbelievable. That's why people are waiting for operations. And apparently we can't afford to repair it, because there's no money in an economy with 15 trillion of financial wealth. Well, let me tell you something else about money. If you think you've got money in the bank, think again. Doesn't work like Hogwarts. And it wasn't your line, it was Michael's line. You haven't got any money in the bank. Money is debt, that's all it is. It's a promise to pay. It's printed on the banknote. It should be printed on your bank statement. Your bank statement does not represent money. It's just a statement of what the bank owes you. If you have money in the bank, they owe you it back. That's all it means. If you borrow from them, you owe it back to them. That's all that means. Doesn't mean anything else. It's just made up. It's a number. But the point is that when you deposit money in the bank, this is the other mystery that we need to understand. They can't lend it to somebody else. Because if they did lend it to somebody else, they'd have to ask your permission to raid your bank account to give it to somebody else, and you wouldn't give it. I mean, if I went to somebody in the audience here and said, let's go to our bank, you tell them that they want to lend it to Richard Murphy, is that all right? Or you might as well just do it ourselves, direct, mightn't we? I mean, if you really think I'm trustworthy. But that isn't how banks work. When banks lend, and again, every single central bank around the world now agrees this is true, they make new money. They use the most radical piece of technology to do it. There you are, that's it. That's how you make money. You tap £10,000 into the current account, and you tap 10 into the loan account. I missed off a naught if you counted. I only put 1,000 into the loan account, but we should have put both. Equal and opposite. Double entry bookkeeping, debits and credits. That's all it is. That's how banking works. You think you can spend the £10,000. You can spend the £10,000 because you promised to repay the bank. But there was no physical cash involved and nobody else's money was involved. So therefore, when you put money in the bank, and there's over 2.5 trillion of money sitting in bank accounts in the UK, the bank doesn't need it to lend it to somebody else because actually, you can't even do the double entry to show how it could. It's impossible. I've tried. Tried and tried and tried to do the double entry. You can't do it. That money is redundant, useless, absolutely dormant, hopeless. As hopeless as the pension savings that most of you have got. What do you get when you buy a pension? You buy a second-hand piece of paper. It's called a Marks & Spencer share, but Marks & Spencers don't see the money, nor do Tesco's, nor do BP, nor do anybody else. It's just a second-hand piece of paper. It's irrelevant. So we need to change the rules on savings. I would require that 25% of all new pension contributions each year, in exchange for the £70 billion a year we spend subsidising pension contributions, should be used for investment in public assets. And I would end all ISA accounts and say, if you want an ISA account, then you must buy one from the government, and again, the money should be made available for public investment. How much could I find a year by making these two simple tax rules changes? Over 100 billion. Do you know, I could rebuild Queen Elizabeth Hospital in King's Lynn and the hospital in West Suffolk, and I'm sure some equivalent hospital around here with that 100 billion and have a lot of change. In other words, I can find the money. It's not hard. We just have to think differently. We have to ground ourselves in a reality of money. We have to talk about the proven economics of money. And as I've told you, some of this goes back to 1694, some of it goes back to 1866. And the myths of like the balanced budget goes back to 2010. Or the Bank of England independence goes back to 1997, but they're all a load of hogwash. This is neoliberalism. There's nothing true in any of it. We can have the things that we need, is my message. We can find the money for investment. We can find the public services. We can fund the public services we need. But we have to simply sing a different song about money. We have to make it our tool for public benefit. And everybody would be better off. And the way to make this country best off is to do the exact opposite of what I'm afraid to say I've been hearing of late, which is to cut benefits. Because if you let the wealthy save, and you give them a big tax subsidy to do it, do you know what they do? They put it in a bank account, or they buy a second-hand share, or they buy a second-hand property. But nothing is added to the economy. But if you give the money to the people who are poorest in our society, what do? They go and spend it. God, the terrible people. They actually feed the kids. What an awful thing to do. But the point is, if they feed the kids, they buy something from a shop, and the shop employs somebody, and they pay tax. And then the person who's been paid has some money left over. And do you know what they do with it? Reckless spendthrifts. They go and spend it as well. Awful people. This is called the multiplier effect. It's a well-known phenomenon. So if you want to grow the economy most, you don't give it to the wealthy, you give it to the poorest, because they spend it into use. So we have to rethink everything. We have to, therefore, I'm going to come to my summary because I know I've got very little time left. We have to write a new story. We have to write a new story which upends almost everything we know, and yet which uses all the stories we do know. We do, if you're an economist, know that the Bank of England creates money for the government, and quantitative easing proved it, by the way. Of course it did. We created 895 billion out of thin air to save the economy in 2008 and during COVID. We did not get hyperinflation as a result. If you notice people walking around with wheelbarrows of money in 2021, let me know, because I didn't see anyone. There was nobody who did, of course. We just need to talk about an economy where care is our priority, and where money is our servant, and where wealth and its accumulation is not as important as sharing, because sharing actually will make us all richer. We have the instruments. What we need to do is have a better song to sing. Our job now is to start humming it. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Lots of questions. And I think we've got enough questions to keep us going for an hour or two here, so we better crack on. Right, well, I'll try and group them if I can, but there's a few questions, Richard, about inflation, not surprisingly.
You amaze me.
Marie Potter wants to know if the government creates money, how would it affect the value of our currency? Martin Drew, does tax no more than control inflation? And Sean King puts it quite pithily, if we print money ad infinitum, how do we control inflation?
Okay, Martin, why did you do that to me? Martin knows where I am. He could have asked any time he liked. Look, inflation. Nobody wants inflation. People keep on saying that the idea I put forward, it's called modern monetary theory, which is a rubbish name. Because it's not modern, because it's actually been around for a very long time. And most people think of theory as something that's unproven, and this has been proven. It's actually what happens, and the central banks agree that it's what happens day in, day out, and the law's there to confirm it is what happens day in, day out. And when I talk about central banks, I'm talking about the US Federal Reserve, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan. That's most of the world in central banking terms. Well, there's quite a lot of others as well, but they're pretty influential. So we're not talking about something which is radical. We're talking about something that happens, and that's the key point. As I said, we did print £895 billion of new money in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, and then during COVID. Roughly half for each, nearest damn it. We've now paid back some of that, deeply destructive, and I won't talk about the relationship between that and Liz Truss, because that's just too long a story. But Liz Truss wasn't to blame for everything. Andrew Bailey is what brought her government down, so when she said there was a conspiracy, she was right. He announced quantitative tightening the day before Kwasi Kwarteng's budget, and that was what brought her down. Quantitative tightening is just about the worst thing you can say in public, because there's 5 T's in 2 words. It's taken a lot of practice to master that one. But the point is this. Nothing that I said you can print money without limit. You can't. Absolutely emphatically, you must not. You only print money if there are resources to buy. And what are resources? People and materials. Nothing else. Those are what we put together to make things fundamentally. And skills. Although skills take time to develop. But obviously that's an investment. I don't think education is a black hole, as most politicians will refer to it, I'm afraid to say. Government spending disappears into black holes, doesn't it? No, it's called an investment. But you don't do the spending unless there's something to buy. If you want to try to spend too much, you will create inflation. And we've done that every now and again. Why did we get inflation in 2021? Because we reopened too quickly after COVID without notice, and everybody wanted a new fitted kitchen. They hadn't done anything for over a year. They'd been in this kitchen, it looked grubby, and people wanted one. The trouble was there weren't any fitted kitchens to buy because nobody had been making them. All the components were in China. Nobody was shipping from China because all the ships were in the wrong place in the world, and therefore the price went up. And then Putin decided to invade Ukraine, and the financial markets decided they'd do a little bit of speculation, because that meant, of course, that oil and gas and wheat and fertilizer, which are the things that come from that part of the world. 20% of all fertilizer in the world comes from Ukraine. Most people don't know that, but it does. And that was all going to be in short supply, so they went into a speculative mode, and they pushed the price up. And what happened? We got inflation. Was there actually a shortage, by the way, of oil, gas, and wheat and fertilizer? No. Never. Wasn't at all. All of that inflation was created by financial markets. Most of our inflation is created by financial market speculation, to be clear. But every now and again, it's got another substance, which is a shortage. Fitted kitchens, cars. Those were the two causes of most of the inflation in 2021. But was it created by there being too much money around? No. There has been a problem created by the money which was created in 2008 onwards until 2021. That's house price inflation. But again, most people say that's because the government printed money to deal with the aftermath of 2008 and 2021. They ignore the fact that actually for 2 years, around 2015, 2016, George Osborne put well over 100 billion into the UK's private banks so that they could lend out more on mortgages because he was very worried that they might not win the election as the Tories because house prices weren't going up fast enough to keep the middle class happy. That's where you get inflation from. That was deliberate. But we don't worry about house price inflation, do we? We all feel better for that. It's weird, isn't it? Everybody thinks they're better off when we get house price inflation. But when you get inflation in the price of a tin of baked beans, whoa, we're worried about it. Baked beans matter. And actually, it goes the other way round. Can I just make clear? We're going to get a crash sometime soon. If you don't know about it, watch my video on Saturday morning, a 16.5-minute presentation from me on the Bank of England financial stability report just out. If you decode it, they're saying, panic! That's the right way to interpret it. Everything is going wrong in the financial markets, and they're quite sure that they are not on top of it. We're going to have a crash. Share prices could fall by 40%. That's the normal that happens in these situations. That's deflation. That's all it is. The prices are going down. But we'll panic. We don't like prices going down. So what would you rather, inflation or deflation? The world goes horribly wrong with deflation. But actually, the deflation in the price of shares is no different from the price of a tin of baked beans, which were on the supermarket shelf at £1, now being marked down to 60p, sale price, today only. That's what it is. It's just a remarking of the price. So we have to understand that inflation is something that actually most of us like a bit of. But if we print money, it won't create it so long as there's something to buy. If there's nothing to buy, you get inflation. But there is no track record in this country of creating inflation by overprinting money since 1694. In fact, we've got inflation data, and this is staggering. We've got inflation data which goes back into the 1500s. And if you want to have a look at it, there's a chart, but you don't find it on the Bank of England, even though they produced it, because it's ever so difficult to find it there. You have to look at something called the St. Louis Fed, which is one of the central reserve banks of the USA, and they have amazing data. If you're a real data freak on economics, you go there. And this chart is staggering, because what it shows is that every time we have a spike of inflation in this country, 2 years later, we don't have inflation. In fact, we normally have deflation. And do you know what? All of that happened without having an independent Bank of England or any interest rate policy to correct it. Didn't need it. Interest rates don't correct for inflation. But I don't want inflation any more than you do. And the point I'm making is that if we had this system, we would be planning to not spend more than the capacity of the economy. We're trying to get to full employment and no further. Would we sometimes make a mistake? Have you ever made a mistake in life? No, I haven't either. But chancellors of the Exchequer do, and I gave up ambition to be one of them a while ago, although the Telegraph said I was going to be in 2016, which I found really amusing because I wasn't an MP. Nonetheless, we're not going to get inflation if we manage the economy properly, but we will obviously need different parameters. We won't be balancing the books, we'll be managing the resources. But so long as we manage the resources properly and we don't try to actually do more than is possible within what we've got available in the country, we will not get inflation. In fact, we'll probably have less inflation than we do now.
Right.
Because, let me just add a point there.
Right, well,
The Bank of England create half our inflation because interest rates are too high, and that's inflationary.
I've got 35 questions here.
You got 35 questions? My bedtime's 9 o'clock.
Right.
We're in trouble.
Given what you've just said, what Caroline Bagley asks is there a conspiracy to keep the status quo when other options are available that are beneficial to all citizens? And, relatedly, Joan Wally asks, if the government knows it doesn't have to balance the books, why does it insist on doing so at the risk of its own survival?
Because what is Rachel Reeves going to be doing in 2029? Is she going to be Chancellor? No. Is she going to be an MP? Pretty darned unlikely, isn't it, right now? Pretty darned unlikely. I think the people of Leeds, or wherever it is she's an MP for, will see the light and vote for somebody else in. She wants a job, doesn't she? Where do you think she's going to get the highest paid job? Her career at the Bank of England was not illustrious. She might like to claim it was. But it's rather like her career at HBOS. She likes to claim she was a banker there. She was actually in customer relations. Wasn't that impressive? No, she obviously wants to be wealthy and in a city position. So she's not going to upset power. I'm desperately cynical, but this is what most of our horribly bankrupt politicians now do. They go into it to end up rich. They don't go into it to serve us. How are we going to change that? Only by changing democracy. I went through the processes. We have to change our democracy. So campaigns to change the way we elect people to get better parties, to get better outcomes, are fundamental to actually reconnecting people with politics, but also the politicians with their obligations. What was the first part of that question? Is there a conspiracy? Yes.
Is there a conspiracy?
Of course there is a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Of course there is. They hate me. I'm quite used to it. I get a lot of flack. If you write a blog, 3 posts every day for 20 years, don't think about it. How many words that is? It's about 8 million. Roughly. I haven't counted. But if you write that many words upsetting the city, they do not like you. They tell you you're an idiot. They tell you you don't know what you're talking about. They tell you everything else. But I was told that when I created that thing called, it was up there earlier, country-by-country reporting. The big 4 firms of accountants said, it's impossible for us to work out where our clients undertake their transactions around the world. And I said, in that case, you better be qualifying their accounts because they aren't keeping proper books and records. They were lying. And so it's a city about what's going on. They want to preserve their power. They want to threaten government. And it's a conspiracy that they're putting forward to try to keep that power. But they don't really have that power. We could take it away from them. And at some point, this narrative is going to grow far enough, fast enough, that we're going to overthrow them. It's as simple as that. Whether I'm alive or not, I don't know. I hope so. But it will happen. It has to, because we can't carry on the way we are. It's going to get ugly. And I don't like the idea of that ugliness. We have to do it quickly, in essence, because otherwise it's horrible.
But then there's a number of questions. A number of people ask, well, where in the world is this? Have they got it right? And Mitch Bransec and Chris Nibbs want to know: is there any country in the world that's got the right system? And relatedly, Joe Sexton asks: given they haven't got the same vested interest systems as ours, does the Chinese system do it better?
That's interesting, because actually I wrote an article about the Chinese system this afternoon, which is probably going to be up on my blog tomorrow morning. The Chinese system is nothing like ours. Let's be honest, there is still a fair degree of state control in China, and there's a fair degree of control of banking, and there's a fair degree of the control of the amount of money that is saved in China, and the state basically uses it. So their system is very unlike ours. The same as the old Soviet system was even more remote from ours. So there's no link. And I don't want to be in the Chinese system, and I don't want to be in the Soviet system.
Yeah,
let's be totally
better is the question.
Sorry?
They do it differently, obviously.
They do that. Well, they do it differently. Does it work better? Well, Russia didn't work out well. Doesn't now either. And does China suffer problems with regard to exchange rates and inflation? Yes, quite badly. And do they get their economic planning wrong? Seriously, they have got a lot of property which they don't need to use at the moment, and they actually are knocking down tower blocks they built by mistake. So look, every economy makes mistakes. Let's accept that. Is there anywhere in the world that is doing precisely what I'm saying right now? Look, the US, the European Central Bank, we, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, they all print money every day, as I described. Without exception, they all do it. And so does Sweden, and so does Denmark, because they have their own currencies too. They all do what I'm saying. They all tax back to control inflation. This is what happens. And they're all in denial. It's an extraordinary fact that I told you about neoliberalism. Neoliberalism believes in competition, except when it comes to economic ideas, when there's only one allowed, which is neoliberalism. And when I was at university, nearly 50 years ago, there was economic competition. There was Keynesianism versus monetarism, and Keynes was by and large in charge in my particular course, and now there isn't. The last Keynesian professor at Cambridge left a couple of years ago, Ha-Yoon Chang. Some of you have come across his rather good book, 23 Things They Didn't Tell You About Capitalism. It's a good book, worth reading in plain English. And Ha-Yoon is a friend of mine, and he went to SOAS because Cambridge was just too inhospitable for a Keynesian professor. And Keynes was at Cambridge. He was at Trinity. That's where he wrote his theories, which got us out of general recession and built the post-war consensus, which gave us, the vast majority of us, the opportunities we got. And now that's destroyed because neoliberalism has taken over. There's only one economic idea. And if you want to teach Keynes or anything else, you now are a professor of something else. A friend of mine, Danny Dorling, is a good economist. He's at Oxford, and he is a professor of geography. Because that's the way he can do economics there, because he can't do economics because they won't let him. So he does it as a geographer. I teach economics, always have done. But at Sheffield, I'm an accountant. Doesn't make any difference. I did the same job as I did at City, where I was a political economist. So, no, there is a conspiracy.
There is.
Sorry?
There is a conspiracy.
Oh, there's a conspiracy, yeah. We are to be silenced.
You'll be pleased to know we've had Danny Dorling here.
Have you?
Addressing us, yeah.
Nice guy.
Good, very good. Now then...
Don't go for too long a drinking session with him.
No, we didn't. No, 400 of us going for a drinking session. Now, you said in your talk that you aren't a revolutionary with hammer and sickle and so on.
Yeah, only pitchforks.
So Adrian Cartwright wants to know that absent revolution then, any change would have to require incremental stepping stones. So what sort of stepping stones would you advocate on the way to a changed economic system?
I don't know that it's a stepping stone. I think there's a revolution of ideas. 10 years ago, this idea was hardly known. Nobody talked about it. The best book on it at the moment is still written by somebody called Stephanie Kelton, a good friend of mine, an American academic. She wrote a book called The Deficit Myth. If you want an introduction to these ideas, then Stephanie's book is really good. It's written in plain English. Ignore the chap who endorses the book on the back cover. He's rubbish. I know him quite well. I mean, we are good friends, but it is very good. She's been, told off by everybody under the sun. The point is, then we were mad. But remember how change happens. First they ignore you. Then they laugh at you. Then they get really angry with you. And then they thought it all along. We've been through the ignored stage. I think we're over the laughed at stage now. They're really angry now because they realize we actually are talking about something which is real, which is threatening the city, which is challenging the Treasury, which is saying there's a better way of doing things. And there is quite a lot of stress around this. And that's why it's being discussed. And you were saying you had heard Rory Stewart talking to Zach Polanski, the new leader of the Green Party. Now, Zach is listening to a very unwise economist on this issue, otherwise known as me. And I know Zach. I'm not a member of the Greens. I'm not a member of any political party, for the record. I'll advise anyone as long as they're not racist. But he does believe in this. And there are a few people in other political parties who do as well. A few members of the Labour Party do, but they're too frightened to say it. But it is happening. And there will be that sudden moment when enough people understand. And there is a theory about tipping points. When about 3.5% of people begin to realize something's important and they begin to talk about it a lot, then something changes. And I find it staggering. We have 308,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel where I put these ideas out, often remarkably repetitively. I have to admit, not every day is completely original. I mean, if you're going to make 15 minutes of video a day, you've got to work quite hard to think up a script. And, I do repeat. And actually, I got worried about that. And then I realized that that's what people want, because this is difficult. Because what you're being asked to do is basically stand on your head and see the world from back to front, from everything you learned. The government is not like a household. The government does actually print money. There is no such thing as taxpayers' money. There's only government-created money. Governments don't borrow. Governments take deposits from the City of London. Everything is different from what you were told. But when the light bulb goes on, and when it goes on in enough people, there will be a change. I don't think it's as long away as you think, and I think we will actually get change for that reason. And I am staggered by the number of people who want to read this stuff. 1 million views a month on my blog. Every morning I wake up and I've written 3 blogs before breakfast. That's a definition of sadness. couple of thousand words before breakfast, that's what everybody needs to do. Blow going to the gym, just get some words out.
Well, I've had a couple of hundred on this one, not more than a couple of thousand then, Richard. Christine Powers asked a very different question, looking across the European Union. Would our economy look any different if we'd have adopted the euro?
Oh, God, don't even talk about it.
Right, okay.
A lot of people don't like Gordon Brown. And there are some reasons not to like Gordon Brown. I know him, not well, but I know him. And he did quite a lot of things which were rather daft. And we didn't always agree with each other. Although I was in the Treasury rather more often in his days than I have been since. But he did one thing which was absolutely fantastic. He kept us out of the euro. Tony Blair would have taken us in without a shadow of a doubt. And he said, no, this doesn't work. And the euro would have been a disaster because we couldn't have made our own money. We'd have had to have made euros and would have been subject to what's happening in Greece and Malta and Cyprus and Finland and so on. And would we have therefore been able to manage our economy in the way we wanted? No. Would we have had the interest rate that we might have wanted? No, because we'd have had the German interest rate because they dominate the market. They cannot control their economy with the freedom that we have. And it is our ability to create money. I mean, the euro was a bonkers idea. A state is defined in a very limited number of ways in political theory, and I'm not going to go into a whole lecture on this right now. But one of the ways is, okay, it can defend its borders. Okay, armies are important. The other way is it can create money and then collect tax. Both are down to violence, by the way, because, you know, if people don't want to pay tax, eventually you get a bit violent with them and lock them up. But it comes down to the power of the state to enforce its will. When you actually are using somebody else's money, you cease to actually run your own state. You're running an arrangement for somebody else. Which is why Scotland, at the moment, does not have its own economy. It uses the English pound, and Wales uses the English pound. And that's why, if they became independent, they would have to have their own currencies. And that's why I'm quite popular in Scotland, because I say so. Really bizarrely, as a guy who lives in East Anglia with an Irish passport, I'm the leading commentator on economics in The National, which is the only pro-independence newspaper in Scotland. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what I do. I've got to write a column tomorrow. What am I going to write a column about? Something that you've asked tonight.
We'll see if we can give you some food for thought. We've got some mics upstairs and downstairs, so if anybody wants
random questions.
to ask any random questions, please feel free to put your hands up. In the meantime, while you're thinking about that, I don't know if this is a tongue-in-cheek question or not, but Jackie Hemingway asks, where is Elon Musk's money and what's it doing?
Look, this is a really important thing. First of all, I've got to tell you something. Money does not grow on rich people. If there's a magic money tree, then rich people aren't the trunk. Central banks are. That's where the magic money tree is. Where is Elon Musk's money? Look, I'm sure he's got a lot of money, but he hasn't got anything like the billions of pounds he's supposed to have. He's got companies which might be worth billions, trillions of pounds, but there's no money there. He's only worth several trillion because people have decided to buy shares in his companies, which imply that his shareholding is worth trillions. And you really do have to understand that these numbers are made up. Literally, they are make-believe. He hasn't got that money. Bill Gates hasn't got that money. Warren Buffett hasn't got that money. Nor has Jeff Bezos. Who else am I missing out of this list? Doesn't matter. None of them have actually got trillions of money sitting around or whatever they're meant to be worth. They've just got companies that are supposedly worth that much. And watch what happens when their share prices fall, as I predict they're going to, because the Bank of England says they are. When their share prices fall, their personal worth will collapse. They will have no less money, they will still own the same percentage of the companies that they do now, but the companies will be worth less. We'll have marked the prices down, the same as the baked beans could go down from £1 to 60p on the shelves in Tesco tomorrow. Would there still be tins of baked beans on the shelves? Yes. Would the companies still be there? Could they still make stuff? Yes. But will their money have apparently disappeared? No, because it was never there in the first place. It's just a valuation. It's just literally a figure. How much is that carafe worth?
Depends if you're thirsty.
Sorry?
Depends whether you're thirsty.
Depends whether you're thirsty. Smart Alec in the front row. You always get one. Well, it could be, but it could be an amazing work of art as well. I could put it up for sale for $1 million in a gallery and say you've got to pay for it. And you know, some fool might come along and pay for it. So we don't know what value is. Value is what some mug will pay for anything. And the point I'm making is that, therefore, don't understand that money really exists. Money is just a measure in this case, and that's what it is. Money is not necessarily a stack of stuff in the bank, or what people think is a stack of stuff in the bank. No, it is just a measure of value in this case. They are supposedly worth this because an accountant has multiplied the number of shares by the current share price and said the answer is $1 trillion. But in a week's time, it might be $500 billion. He'll still be able to live. The bills won't be a problem.
No, I'm sure not. John Mottram wants to know...
Wasn't he a football commentator?
I think he was, yes. I don't think it's the same one.
Sorry.
What he says is this. One of the principal aims of government is defence of the country. Would the change that you're proposing, would your proposed changes change this in substance? Ian, can you speak up? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Right, sorry about that. John Mottram wants to know whether your proposals would have an impact on the defence of the realm.
No. Do you know, we might even have more ships than we got admirals. But it's the other way around at the moment. We've got far more admirals than we got ships, which is really quite bizarre, isn't it? Because we decided not to build ships. We decided not to send them to sea even. And the ones we do send to sea leak. So we've made some pretty lousy decisions with regard to defence right now. So are we really defending the realm at the moment? Not terribly well, by all accounts. I knew a lad who's just joined up for the army not long ago, and I saw him for the first time since he came back on leave after his initial training. And I said, how are things going? He used to be a coffee barista, because I know every barista in Ely. Absolutely every single one of them, and they all know I drink black Americano. I never have to water. It's very easy. But he came back. He didn't want to be a barista anymore. He's now private. And I said, everything okay? He said, well, the trouble is, I've joined a unit, and we're 30% understaffed. So the battalion is not a battalion at all. If the government decided in the system that I'm talking about that they wanted to put the resources of the country into the army or the navy or the air force, I'm suggesting that if there were people who wanted to sign up to be those privates and they could persuade them by perhaps increasing the pay rate or making the training less onerous or the training sergeants a little less sexist or whatever it might be, then they might get those people to go there. In other words, we could use resources and we would have the money to pay for those resources. So in fact, my system would make it more likely because we would have to think, how do we encourage young people to want to join the forces? And we'd actually have to think about the quality of the lives of those young people to get them in, and the money would follow them into the forces in that case. So no, always this economics is about what do you want to achieve, not where does the money come from. Because if there are young people who don't want to be baristas or do other bullshit jobs, as David Craver would call them, but actually want to be in the forces, then I could find the money to put them in the forces, if that's what we decided was the national priority. We may not do as much education. There may not be as many baristas. Would the world end with fewer baristas? Probably not. I'd get upset. I'd have to wait for 3 minutes longer to get my black Americano. I think I could live with that if I thought the country was defended. But no, the decision is one that could be made easily. And we'd be better off than we are now. It would be better defence rather than worse, I'd suggest.
Jonathan Dannant is thinking about previous elections in this country and the scares or the fears of people about inflation and spending too much money and so on, and not having affordable manifestos. And he asks, how do you overcome these fears that are generated in people?
It is a difficulty. I mean, I know that some of you are confused about what I've said. That will be inevitable. If you've never heard these ideas before, they are confusing, because I'm turning everything on its head, as I said. So it will be a problem to say to people, I know I've told you for ages that there's a shortage of taxpayers' money, but actually there's no such thing. You know, our politicians aren't very good at admitting they get things wrong. That's one of the big problems we've got. We'd have to actually get them to admit that everything they've said in the past was not right. And that will be a difficulty. But the fact is, that comes down to, you know, I said every song, we need a better song to sing. We actually need to sing better songs. We need to sing better songs. We need to learn what they are and talk about it and spread it and talk about it and get it in the media and talk about it on YouTube and on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram. And that's happening. And that's how this changes now. The politicians haven't got as much power as they'd like to think. In fact, let's be honest, most of the time we either ignore them or laugh at them, don't we? Because what else is there to do with them? You don't give them a lot of credibility most of the time because they talk what I often call crap. I was told I wasn't allowed to use the word crap in the Scottish Parliament once. They said that's not parliamentary language. I said, oh, it's an acronym. It stands for a completely rubbish approximation. I made it up on the spur of the moment, but I got away with it. And they do talk completely rubbish approximations to the truth. We need to tell the truth. And once some politicians begin to tell the truth, we'll begin to have the debates. And when some people actually disrupt this, because at the moment they all say the same thing, but if somebody disrupts it, then the narrative will change. We'll have a better song to sing. That's my hope. Seriously. I can't set it to music. I know the staves are there, though. That's what I've outlined tonight. I've got the staves. You've got to put the crotchets on. There's a hand up over here.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a mic just on it working its way around to you.
A real live human being is going to ask me a question.
You're all right.
I'm not saying you're not a real live human being, Ian, but
My husband's just suggested that I don't need a mic, so he'll be in trouble when we get home. Everybody thinks, not everybody, so I'll rephrase that, a lot of people think that Nigel Farage is right.
yeah.
How do we change that?
Well, first of all, we call him a racist. Because he is. And I understand a bit about racism. Where does it... Murphy? How old are most people here? You remember the sign? No blacks, no dogs, no Irish. My father lived in fear of that. Absolute fear of it. His whole life, he was terrified of it. I was brought up with that. My older brother was taken in by Special Branch once because he had a pair of binoculars in Ipswich Docks. He was looking at gulls. He's a bird watcher. He's been the Suffolk bird recorder most of his life. I had a company in Ireland in the 1980s, and I got taken in one night. What are you going to Ireland so often for? Because I'm running a company in Ireland and I live in London. I know it's bizarre, but I was. Strange part of my career, I bought Trivial Pursuit to Europe at the age of 26, signed the European distribution deal and set up a factory in Ireland to make the game boards. How do you think I know about tax havens? I did it. But racism is real. And I know how corrosive it is because I saw it in my family. Yeah, I look as though I've got white privilege, but actually my wife is entirely Irish, and our extended family has suffered a lot with racism. So first of all, we have to call him out for what he does wrong. And secondly, we have to point out that everything he's said so far on economics is crap, bar one thing. And I hate to say this, but there is a reform policy which has been nicked from me. Can't help it, Richard Tice promotes it often. When the government created that 895 billion quid that I talked about, they gave it to the banks, because that's the way the money got injected into the economy. They make it, they give it to a commercial bank, the commercial bank pays it to the end user. And there is a set of very special bank accounts in between. They're called central bank reserve accounts, and let's be honest, if you've never heard of one, neither did I until a few years ago. I had to learn a lot about this. Those central bank reserve accounts are how the banks pay each other. And in 2008, they stopped lending money to each other. They didn't trust each other anymore. And the reason why the government had to pump so much money so quickly into the banking system was so that there was sufficient in the central bank reserve accounts so they could pay each other still. But the bizarre thing is that the government gave them all this money into their central bank reserve accounts, and then said they were deposit accounts, and then they paid interest on it. Just imagine that if somebody gave you £1 million and then said, that's okay, we'll now pay you 50,000 quid a year of interest on it on top. That's what we did to the commercial banks. And at one point, we were paying them 45 billion quid a year as subsidy because we created money that they were using and they got it free of charge. They didn't make that money. The government made it and let them use it. And then they paid interest on it. I mean, it's bonkers. Well, I said we don't need to do that. We can cut that out. And if you want to find another 30 billion to spend in the economy, just cut the payments to the commercial banks. Unfortunately, the person who's heard that and talks about it is Nigel Farage. He says that's how he'll find 30 billion quid. So I'm afraid to say I lent him that policy. Everything else he says is crap. How do we convince people of that? I don't know. I wish I did know the answer to this, because he literally just lies through his back teeth about everything he says. There's not an element of truth. He says that everybody's an illegal immigrant. You can't be an illegal immigrant until you've got here, applied for asylum, and been told you don't qualify for it. There is no such thing as an illegal immigrant in a boat. Do you know the easiest way to solve the small boat problem? How would you solve the small boat problem? Easily. Give them all a ticket on P&O. Done. No small boats anymore. I've just broken all the criminal gangs as well. We will have to process a few more people, and we might have to invest a little bit more than have 1,000 people appraising these. But we would send people back fast as well, and we'd put them back on P&O. But the point is, we wouldn't have any illegal immigrants via small boats. We'd smash the criminal gangs, which is what Keir Starmer says. OK, I've solved your problem, Keir Starmer. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's logical, it's absolutely achievable tomorrow. And if we did that, we could also differentiate the people who come in legally from those who don't, because we'd know how many people came in, and we'd have them under control, because we've even given them the tickets and asked for identity before they get here. They won't turn up without passports. We'll actually ask them to turn up with a passport. But because we won't talk common sense, we won't solve it. But that would be common sense, because we could then process those claims quicker, because we'd actually know who these people are, for a start. But we won't do what is obviously sensible. And until we do begin to do what is obviously sensible and deliverable and achievable and real, which is the whole message I'm talking about here, and think differently, we can keep in the paradigm. And the paradigm is artificially created. We have illegal immigrants. They're the problem. And they are 5% of all people who come to the UK anywhere a year. And 80% of them, roughly, are granted asylum. So the supposed problem that Nigel Farage is talking about is about 10 to 12,000 people a year that actually are trying to get here and eventually don't get asylum. That wasn't the answer I expected, or question I expected to be asked, but it's a good question, because it still highlights the same thing. Whilst politicians can't work out obvious answers to the questions they ask, like how do we solve the small boats problem, and I have just explained how I could solve the small boats problem, okay, I would shift the problem into the processing centres in the UK, but we could deal with those people more humanely than we do now, instead of subjecting them to the torture of having to cross the channel in a small boat. And it's bloody cold in the channel right now. My wife is a cold water swimmer. She tells me right now it's pretty darn cold. 6 degrees. Well, why should we subject them to that? Why can't we actually treat them with a bit of dignity and turn them around and they say, no, you didn't qualify, we'll ask you to go back again. We could do that. We could solve the problem. And Nigel Farage would have nothing to talk about. That's my answer. Cost a little bit of money, but not much.
Right. Ian Overton, he wants to know...
Are you moving the window?
Yeah, open window. Yeah.
Sorry, Ian.
Quite an interesting question is, how does capitalism fit into your better song?
Neoliberalism is a particular form of capitalism which is designed to increase inequality and wealth concentration and concentrates on financial capital rather than productive capital. And it's deeply destructive because it does not add value. All it is about is reallocating resources in society. And I'm really bored by that if it's promoted by socialists. And I'm really bored by that if it's promoted by capitalists. Because I'm actually interested, and I hope you're beginning to get this idea, in what really can be produced. Because I've made real things in my career. You know, that's why I'm quite proud of the fact I have made a factory or two along the way. I love it when people tell me I'm just an academic in an ivory tower and I mention I've made a factory or two. Because most people haven't done that. I have no problem with people owning businesses. I have no problem with people making profit. It'd be a bit hypocritical given that I'm still a director of a company which is making profit. Our YouTube channel is a for-profit business, and it is making a profit now. I make enough money to be able to pay 2 people reasonable salaries and boost my pension. Am I ashamed of that? No. Have I got anything to apologize for? No. Will I apologize for it? No. Because I am making a product that somebody wants. Why should I be ashamed of that? What is shameful about the type of capital we have is that it is trying to extract from people. So we have banks charging interest rates which are too high because Andrew Bailey of the Bank of England has done quantitative tightening deliberately to hold mortgage rates too high. That is exploitation. We have landlords who are charging rents that are too high on squalid accommodation for students in this university, because I guarantee they will exist as horrible, squalid, tiny rooms that people will be paying vastly too much for, and that is exploitation. And we have monopolists who are extracting value as well, who are taking money out of our pockets. What are some of them called? Let's start with Tesco and Sainsbury and Lidl and Aldi, because there's a price cartel going on, let's be totally honest. They might say they do price match, but actually what they're really doing is making sure they're all making enough money to sustain themselves, and we're paying too much for our food as a consequence. And they are exploiting farmers who can't stay in business as a result. I hate the exploitation. So would Adam Smith, for those of you who know something about economics. Adam Smith said that when a few merchants get together, they conspire against the interest of the public. That's what I dislike. Only now we've made it into an art form. We've made it into the financial markets. We've made it into the FTSE 100. I don't have a problem with small business. I don't have a problem with competitive markets. I don't have a problem with people trying to set up a business on their own. Capitalism, as capitalism should be, fantastic. Exploitation, thank you very much. We can do without that. Financial exploitation, we don't need it. Let's put bankers back in the box. Anybody seen Dad's Army? Yeah, I thought you might have done. Let's have a Captain Mannering, by all means, but let's not have some of the stupid bankers we've got on television. Banking then was a service. It understood the customer, it tried to meet their needs, it helped them. Now, the only interest of a banker is to exploit. We used to have 5 banks in Ely, where I live. We're down to 1. I think that's going soon. They couldn't give a damn about their customers, could they? They don't care. All they want is to take our money and use it. And I'm not interested in that. I want real added value. And you can't do that over the internet from a distance. I want somebody in my high street. That's what I want, real service, real things. I'm back to reality again. I always am.
I'm sure we'd all echo that, Richard. Apologies to those people who've asked questions we haven't had time to get around to, but we've reached the witching hour. Just like to thank Richard very much for his, what I think you'll all agree, is very interesting and stimulating evening. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you.